Hey guys, today we're going to take a look at the difference between the SLK eras and the 11.624 powers. Let's get into it. Now, reviewers haven't drawn comparisons between the two paddle series because their construction is basically the same. If you take a look at the x-rays between the cores of both different paddle series, they're nearly identical. So let's talk about what the difference is in terms of their actual playability. But before we get into that, let's take a look at their shapes and dimensions. Now, both paddle series have an elongated and a wide body option, but the one thing the 11.624 powers have over the SLK eras is that they do have a hybrid shape in the vapors. But let's start talking about the comparisons between the other shapes. Starting off, let's take a look at the elongated options. So both of these paddle shapes have beef longer handle, though there is a bit of a sharper taper on the eras compared to the Hirache. And also, if you look at the top mold, the top area here on the eras is a bit flatter compared to the Hirachi shape. Now, in terms of the numbers, they were basically the same. So we got 118 for the swing weight for both of them, and we got 6.35 on the twist weight for the Era versus 6.40 for the twist weight on the 11.624. So pretty small difference there. Moving on, let's talk about the wide body options. So for 11.624, they have the Pegasus shape, which has a flare at the top two corners that tapers down. Now, in comparison, the SLK eras have straighter sides, which has a shape that's more similar to the Vatic Bloom or the Neonic Player Pipebacks. Now, the Pegasus shape, because it has a flare at the top two corners, it does have a bit of a higher hitting area because the weight gets concentrated a bit higher in comparison to the Era, which has a bit more of a well-rounded sweet spot. All right, now moving on, let's talk a bit more about the playability, starting with the overall firepower. Now, if I had to compare the two series, I would say that their power levels are very, very similar. If anything, I would give the edge here to these 11.624 power paddles. But I also don't think that this is a fair comparison to make because the 11.624 paddles I have seen a lot more use, while the SLK Era paddles I have are new. So these, they have broken in a bit more. But even if I were to hit them brand new next to each other side by side, I think the difference between the two would be they're basically negligible because I think that they'd be really similar anyways. And I wouldn't use firepower as a metric to decide between the two paddles. Now, one important metric that I would use to decide between the two paddles is the overall feel of the face. Now, we've talked about the 11.624 power paddles before, but to quickly recap, they have a really stiff, crisp feel, though it's not harsh and unpleasant because it still gives you good dwell time. And this gives it a nicer feel of the face, and I think that's why these paddles have become really popular. Now, in comparison, the SLK eras have a very similar feel to the 11.624 powers, but I do find the feel on this to be a bit more pleasant. There's less of a stiff, hollow sensation that you do have with the 11.624 powers, and there's just a little bit more of a give into the face here. Now, personally, I feel that the majority of people may enjoy the feeling of the SLK eras more than the 11.624 powers. It's just a bit more of a pleasant feedback that I find just because it's less stiff and it has more give into the face. Now, the feel of a paddle is something that's very hard to recommend to another player, mainly because every player has different preferences. So you can't really say that the feel of one paddle is better than the other, but I do think that the feel of the SLK eras would be more appealing to the general public. But that said, there still are going to be people that will prefer the feel of the 11.624 powers because they will want that stiffer feedback. All right, now to quickly summarize the differences between these two paddle series, I wouldn't use metrics like spin or firepower to decide between the two. I think they're too similar between the two series and it's too close to call for those. Instead, I would take a look at the shapes/dimensions and their overall feel. So for the shapes and dimensions, they're going to be different between the two paddle series. The sweet spots are going to be in different areas because of the way that the balance is. And one other thing is that if you want a hybrid paddle, you're going to have to go with 11.624 powers because they do have that vapor shape. Now, the most important metric is going to be the feel because that's the one that's the most different between the two. Now, even though they do have the same construction and they do feel very similar to each other, there is a noticeable difference. There is less of a stiff feedback on the SLK eras, and there is a stiffer feedback, of course, on the 11.624 powers. So I would use that more as something to decide between the two. But other than playability, there are some things to consider as well. For example, 11Six24 only has a 6-month warranty, while Selkirk has a 1-year warranty at this time. And 11Six24s are also slightly cheaper, and they were also the first to come to market with this construction. But anyways, that's it. Thanks for watching. And if you do want to pick either of these paddles up, I've added my discount code and links to buy them in the video description below. See you guys. Hey, that's what I wanted.